Good morning, and welcome to Missoula Real Estate Today. This is Denny Bedard. Missoula Real Estate Today is presented by Diane Beck and Becky Peterson, the Beck and Beck team at Windermere Real Estate on News Talk KGVO. Tax-deferred strategies for your upcoming transactions and lots more helpful advice that homeowners need to know. This should be a very educational program on Missoula Real Estate Today this week. We thank you for joining us, and we welcome a first-time guest, Russell Marsan, Senior Vice President and Certified Exchange Specialist with IPX1031. Long handle. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Danny. It's great to be here today.
Very nice to have you. Well, we better jump in and do the get acquainted there, Russell. What is IPX1031 Exchange, and how can it be a benefit to our listeners?
Yeah, first of all, IPX1031 is the largest qualified intermediary in the nation. All we do is facilitate 1031s, and if somebody wants to facilitate a 1031 exchange, they have to use a qualified intermediary. And I've been doing it for 28 years, but that's all we do is facilitate 1031s nationwide.
And what do your duties entail as a senior vice president?
Well, as a senior vice president, I cover a lot of territory. I travel all over the United States. My main focus is dealing with clients. So clients call me, ask me questions. I guide them through the process, tell them what they can and can't do. I teach accredited courses for CPAs and attorneys. So I'm a free resource for my clients' tax advisors too. So I'll also, help walk them through the process, and especially if they're doing something kind of maybe a little tricky, they're not sure how to make a decision for their clients. So I can provide them with revenue procedure, case law, things like that to help them render decisions. And then I educate professionals. Right, I go out and give anywhere from 1 to 3 hour presentations to realtors, commercial brokers, CPAs, attorneys, and things like that.
Yes, you are an accomplished public speaker, so those are some of the types of events or conventions you might be asked to speak at. Yeah,
I am. Public speaking has always been my passion, right? So ever since high school, I've always done things where it put me into the ability to give presentations. So, and I competed on world levels, both in motivational and humorous as well. I love public speaking, and that's why I love what I do now, because I get to go around and do that all the time. And I get to talk taxes and make them funny with people. Very cool.
Yeah, I bet they think you're a real cracker.
Oh, absolutely. 1031. I mean, who does? People lose sleep at night. They're thinking, oh my gosh, it's like Christmas tomorrow. I got to hear Russell talk about 1031s. Wow.
Take my taxes, please.
Please.
Your background. What led you to IPX1031 all those years ago?
Yeah, so I actually got into real estate about 34 years ago, and sold real estate. And then I was solicited to go to work for a title company, Fidelity National Title at that time, and worked with them as a manager for quite a while. And then IPX is actually a sister company to them. And so IPX approached me and said, hey, we're opening up these territories, and we want to give you several states to go out and do presentations in, right? And talk about how to use the 1031 exchange to build wealth. And so that was a dream come true, because I get to take my show on the road. And so that was 28 years ago.
Man. Missoula Real Estate Today, presented by Diane Beck and Becky Peterson, the Beck and Beck team at Windermere Real Estate. Here on News Talk KGVO, my guest, Russell Marsan, Senior Vice President and Certified Exchange Specialist with IPX1031. And since we are on a show hosted by Diane and Becky at Windermere, Russell, your relationships with realtors, where might your paths cross?
Yeah, they cross all the time, because most of my time is not spent soliciting the actual investor clients themselves, right? I solicit referral sources. So people that have communications and decision making for their clients that own investment real estate. So realtors, I deal with a lot of realtors. I teach training classes, and in fact, at Windermere, I spoke at their state conference just recently. But I do that. That's my relationship with realtors, is I go in and teach them how to use the 1031 exchange to educate their clients, so their clients can build wealth through real estate investing.
Is that something that realtors have found over the years, that I get a lot of inquiries about this, and I understand why I get a lot of inquiries about it, because it deals with investment and trying to build your wealth, but I don't really have my foot deep in the door and understand it entirely. Oh, we got this Marsan dude. Maybe he could help us out. Is that kind of how they seek you out? And
kind of, right? Kind of, but it's not that the clients so much. I mean, they do. They'll contact the realtor and say, hey, I want to do a 1031, but that's not really the majority of cases. Really, it's the opposite. Because 1031 is actually kind of a underused and little known section code. And yeah, I mean, when you think about the entire Internal Revenue Code and you visualize it, it's like it's like a stack of encyclopedias, right? It's
Yes.
thousands and thousands and thousands of pages. 1031 is a little minuscule part of the Internal Revenue Code. And so because of that, not a lot of exchanges actually happen in the scope of all taxpayers, right? So it's not really that. So I go out and I solicit the realtors, CPAs, attorneys, things like that, and let them know, hey, your clients don't know about this. Let me show you how to educate your clients. Because people are what I call real estate complacent, right? They buy real estate, but really it's a side gig, right? They don't really understand financial analysis when it comes to real estate for the most part. Because they're a fireman, they're a teacher, they do something else for a living, right? They buy real estate because somebody said, hey, buy real estate, it's a good investment. But they don't really know. I mean, if you ask them, what's your annualized cash flow a year, on the property, they're like, oh, I don't know. I don't know what my net return is every year based on whatever that asset is worth. And so, I teach them how to go after these people and how to let them know what their options are and to make better decisions so that they can build wealth. Because, hey, I'm preaching to the choir, right? Everybody out in radio land right now listening to me knows that real estate's a great investment.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that. But they're just not really, they don't understand their options. And that's what the 1031 is actually the greatest wealth building tool in the entire Internal Revenue Code, right? Because it allows real estate investors to reposition their real estate assets throughout the course of their entire life without having to pay any taxes. I mean, think about it. As an investor grows in life, their objectives change, right? You're young, you don't have much money. You're trying to build wealth. Okay, so you buy a fixer-upper, a rental property, right? After a little while, it has some appreciation in it, some sweat equity, maybe some positive cash flow. So you're like, hey, this is cool. Let's do it again. They eventually buy another one and another one and another one. Well, the 1031, as they grow in life, their financial objectives are going to change. Initially it's building wealth. So they're going to buy appreciation type properties, that cash flow enough to, make them work. Later on in life, now they own 10, 15, 20 properties and they're retiring. Well, now by default, they have a lot of equity. So their primary financial objective in life should not be appreciation anymore. It should be cash flow. So the 1031 allows you to pivot, right? To go from an appreciation type asset into a cash flow. Or maybe they want to retire from active real estate, so they want to go passive. Well, all of those are different types of real estate. So the 1031 allows you to pivot, right, to those different types of real estate as your financial objectives change without having to pay any taxes. Because the tax hit can be pretty punitive.
With those kinds of accolades, why do you think it's kind of, is it fair to say, under the radar a little bit?
Yeah, well, there's just a lot of misconceptions about that. I mean, just the term itself, 1031 exchange, right? I mean, if you visualize the term exchange, you visualize swapping something with somebody, right? So you think, well, if somebody says, hey, have you thought about doing an exchange? We're like, well, I got to find somebody to swap properties with, right? What are the odds of that happening?
Sure, yeah,
right?
Okay.
Yes, but that's not the case. You get a list and sell your property to whomever you want, and then you've got these time frames of 45 and 180 days to go out and find and buy something else. So it's really, you're just listing and selling, and then within 6 months, you're finding and buying to replace that property.
All right, those are great answers. Great lead into my next question here. Missoula Real Estate Today, presented by Diane Beck and Becky Peterson, the Beck and Beck team at Windermere Real Estate, here on News Talk KGVO. My guest, Russell Marsan, Senior Vice President, Certified Exchange Specialist with IPX1031. Okay, the process, Russell. People, they contact you, they explain, what they have to sell or what they have in mind, what they're trying to accomplish. Where do we go from there? What are the next steps in this whole thing?
Well, let's talk about the first step, right? So as opposed to the next steps, the first step is contact me, right? And so they can contact me anytime, but we need to set up the exchange prior to it closing, right? Because you can't sell an investment property and then after it closes, you can't call me and say, hey, I want to do an exchange, right?
Okay, yeah.
We call that a fully taxable sale that cannot be turned into an exchange. So first of all, I should talk to anyone interested in exchange. I should talk to them well in advance of even selling, right? I don't care if you're selling a year or two from now. It's my job to make sure that people go into their exchange stress-free, knowing exactly what their priorities are and what they should be thinking about and doing. But once they're in contract, they've accepted an offer from a buyer and they've opened escrow, that's when we set up the exchange, right? And we just have to set up the exchange sometime between the opening and closing of escrow. It can be the day before closing, right? It only takes like a couple hours to set up the exchange. It's a pretty quick process for us. But then once it closes, then they've got the 45 days to identify and 180 days to close, right? So, and that's the whole process of the 1031 is we have to set it up during escrow. And then when it closes, they've got 45 days to identify and 180 days to close on their transaction. The 45-day identification period is the number one killer of 1031s, right? Because it's not a long time. It sounds like a long time, a month and a half, but it's not. Yeah. Some people wait until they've closed escrow on the property they're selling to begin the process of looking or writing offers, and that's just a bad strategy, right? Once they're under contract with a buyer on the property they're selling, now they're in a defined closing period, right? They're going to be closing their relinquished property in maybe 30, 40 days. Okay, start writing offers. Get into contract on a replacement property, and maybe even close on your replacement property a week or two after the one you're selling closes. And the reason why I recommend that strongly is because you don't really want to go past the 45th day if you don't have to in your exchange. Because prior to midnight on the 45th day, you can change your mind all you want. You can identify new properties. But as soon as midnight strikes, you can only close on something you've identified. So it begins to get risky after day 45, right?
Indeed.
Yes.
Yeah. I'd like you to go into some detail on some other top misconceptions about 1031 exchanges, if we could. Let me start with this one. Can you buy a primary home or second residence with a 1031?
Ooh, great question. For 1031, in order to qualify 1031, the intent must be to hold that asset for business or investment purposes, not for personal use. So a primary residence, a true primary residence that you just live in, you can't 1031 into or out of, which is fine for most people anyway, because selling a primary residence, right, you already have a phenomenal capital gain exclusion on that. That's called Section 121 of the Internal Revenue Code, and most people have heard of it. That's where if you're single, you get $250,000 of tax-free money. If you're married, you get $500,000. But so not too many people want to actually sell a primary anyway,
right,
because of that section code. But a lot of people would like to use the exchange to buy one. Maybe sell a couple investment properties that you've owned forever. Take that money, buy your dream home up in the ski resort, right, or up on the lake. Well, on its face value, I can't do it because it's a personal use property. But what I can do is go through a conversion process. The IRS created my favorite revenue procedure back in 2008. I read it every night before I go to bed. It gives me happy dreams. I have no life. It's all good. I'm a tax nerd. So what this revenue procedure, it's actually their blessing. It's the IRS saying, hey, you can use a 1031 exchange to buy a personal use property. It's just that you have to satisfy that business use intent first. So if you sell your investment properties, you buy your dream home on the lake. For the first 2 years, you have to treat the property two ways. One is you have to limit your personal use to 2 weeks a year or less, or 10% of the rental history each year. So you have to limit. And by the way, if you're going there to work on the property, that's not a personal use visit. That's a maintenance visit.
Okay.
Right. So talk to your CPA, see if you can use it for more than 2 weeks a year for maintenance visits.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's a timeshare that you own.
Yeah. And then the other thing you have to do is show income on it for the first 2 years, but that's a crazy low standard. You only have to show 2 weeks per year of income on it. That's it. Right. So if you don't need the revenue, if you don't want full-time tenants in it, you can use a 1031 to buy your dream home.
Okay.
It's just for the first 2 years, you have to limit your personal use and then find a buddy like Denny to rent it to you, and then pay the taxes on the 2 weeks per year of income on the property. And then after 2 years, you can do whatever you want. You can move into it as a primary, treat it as a pure second home or vacation home. You never have to rent it again after 2 years.
How about reinvesting rules? Do I only need to reinvest my cash, or only need to reinvest my gain, or what about that?
I get this question every single day, numerous
Is
times.
that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because the questions always start out with me with the clients. They'll start out saying, "Hey, I bought the property for this much. I owe this much. I've improved it by this much." And I'm like, you know what? We really don't need to discuss that. How much are you selling it for? Well, I'm selling it for $600,000. Okay, great. That's what you need to buy for. Your basis, what you paid for the property and your improvements and things like that, your basis is going to transfer into the replacement property. In an exchange, if you don't want to pay any tax, if you want to defer all tax, 3 things have to be equal or greater. All 3 of these things have to be equal or greater. First is sales price. So you're selling for $600,000, you got to buy for $600,000. Well, there's some subtractions. You got to subtract those one-time costs like realtor commissions, title and escrow fees, things like that. But that has to be equal or greater to the sales price. Second thing are the proceeds. That means all of the cash that comes out of the closing of the property you're selling after loan payoff and fees and all that stuff, whatever the cash proceeds are, all of that has to be the down payment for the replacement property. Any cash they touch, they're going to pay tax on. It's okay to do so. You can do a partial exchange. You can buy down in value. You can touch some money if you want to. But if either of those 2 things happen, you're going to pay tax on whatever that delta is, right? And then third thing that has to be equal or greater is the debt. That one, just from a math standpoint, kind of makes sense, right? Because if you sell for $500,000, let's say $200,000 was a mortgage payoff. Okay, well, you sold for $500,000, $200,000 paid off the loan. There's $300,000 of proceeds sitting in your exchange account. But you have to buy for $500 again in order to be equal or greater. So how are you going to do that? You're going to have to take on a new loan to buy something that expensive, right? Unless you replace it with outside cash, right? So if you had $200,000 of cash in that scenario, you could buy the $500,000 equal or greater replacement property all cash. If 2 things happen, to simplify all of this math, if 2 things happen, you never pay tax. Buy and sell for equal or greater value and don't touch any money. Those 2 things happen, there'll be 100% tax deferral.
Missoula Real Estate Today, presented by Diane Beck and Becky Peterson, the Beck and Beck team at Windermere Real Estate here on News Talk KGVO. And my guest is Russell Marsan, Senior Vice President, Certified Exchange Specialist with IPX1031. And also thank you to a couple of Diane and Becky's marketing partners that helped bring this show to you as well. Miles Link at Opportunity Bank of Montana, and Rob Fleming with Man Mortgage. Now back to Russell Marsan. We're kind of in the misconception category here. Replacing debt. I've paid off my loan at the closing. Good for me. I've paid off my relinquished property. Now I don't have any more debt to replace. Right?
Yes. Simple answer.
Yeah, that's your shortest answer.
That's the shortest answer of the
day. That is awesome. How about partnerships? I have associates involved. I don't know, friends, family in the transaction. So are we able to sell an investment property and each partner can do their own 1031 exchange with portions of the proceeds?
Ooh, good question. I'm about to put all of our listeners to sleep. So
no, I don't think you are.
So when you sell a property, so keep in mind that the 10 is tax deferral, and it's tax deferral to a specific taxpayer, right? So whoever the seller is that owns the property being sold, that's the taxpayer. You know, if you and I are buddies and we own a property together as tenants in common, then we're individuals, right? We're both the taxpayers. So we each can do an exchange and go our separate ways. If we own a property tenant in common, maybe we're 50-50 owners, right?
Sure.
So I do an exchange on my 50%. Whether you do an exchange or not doesn't impact me in any way, shape, or form, right? But let's change that scenario. Let's say you and I invest in real estate and we like to do that in an LLC. So we have created our own Denny Russ LLC. Well, that's a different taxpayer, right? Once you have multiple taxpayers in an LLC, that becomes a different tax-paying entity. It has its own tax ID number, separate than ours as an individual. So we're going to file a partnership return every year, 1065 on that, right? So that's the taxpayer. So if the LLC is selling the property, the LLC would have to buy replacement properties because the LLC is a different taxpayer than the individuals. We can't sell as an LLC and buy as 2 individuals to complete a tax-deferred exchange. So if we wanted to go our separate ways, we need to dissolve that LLC in advance of selling and deed out, which is not it's a non-taxable event when you deed to the members of the partnership, and then sell and go our separate ways. I mean, there's a lot more solutions than that. That's just a quick one. But the bottom line is, if anybody out there in Radio Land is thinking of selling investment properties and you're currently in a partnership and you want to go your separate ways, you need to call me. So that we can discuss your options prior to selling, because it can be crucial.
Yeah, I think this is kind of a related question about related parties. Can I Can I sell my current investment property to a family member or buy new property from a family member and have a successful 1031 exchange?
Yeah, so related party issues are tricky because the IRS is naturally, if you're trying to sell to or buy from a related party, the IRS is suspicious, right? That you're doing that to try to stop an exchange from failing and you having to pay tax, right? So you think, oh, I'm not going to be able to make these time frames in exchange, so I'm going to use a related party to save my exchange and not have to pay the tax. So because of that, they've created special rules for 1031. Actually, because of these related party rules, there's actually one state where 1031 exchanges are not allowed because of related party issues. You want to guess what that state is?
Let's see. Let's go with Nevada.
Nope. Arkansas, because everybody's related. Just kidding. Sorry. You had to see that one coming, Danny. Come on. No, just kidding. You can do exchanges everywhere.
That was the guess, not me, folks.
No, just kidding.
Yeah.
No, so selling to a related party, not a big deal. Because it's not really, you're not saving an exchange. So if you're selling to a related party, the IRS is okay with that. You just have to make sure you're selling at fair market value to them. That's the only thing you have to look at. Now, buying from a related party, that's a serious issue. The IRS doesn't like that kind of exchange because they think it's a bailout. They think you're trying to satisfy, you're trying to keep your exchange from failing. So really, there's only two ways to buy from a related party. So if I, as your father, Denny, if you want to buy a property from me, the only way you can buy from me is one of two ways. One is if I, the related party, with my sale proceeds, am also doing a 1031 exchange. So it's a business purpose for me, right? I'm not cashing out. Because if I just cash out and pay my tax, that's cashing out. There's no business use there for me. So you can't buy from me if I'm just cashing out. So I have to be doing an exchange, a full exchange, and it has to be completed. If my exchange fails, it's going to fail your exchange too. The second way is if I'm cashing out, if I'm paying more in taxes, the related party is paying more in taxes than you're deferring from your exchange, then the IRS is okay with that because there's not a basis shift. Because like if you don't do an exchange and you're going to pay $200,000 in taxes, right? And you buy from me, your related party, and I'm cashing out, and I'm only paying $100,000 in taxes. Well, so you're using a related party to net less tax to the IRS, right? Mm-hmm. So this is what they call a basis shift. If I'm paying $300,000 in taxes, and you would have only paid $200,000 in taxes, well, then there's no basis shift, and the IRS is okay with me paying more in taxes, right? So those are the only two ways. So because of that, it's pretty rare that you're able to buy from a related party with a 1031.
Tax deferrals. I never have to pay taxes on a 1031 exchange, do I?
Well, it is a deferral, but you bring up a good point because a lot of people say, hey, Russ, my CPA said just pay the tax because eventually I'm going to have to pay them because everybody out there in Radio Land has been patterned their entire life to believe that two things in life are absolutely 100% inevitable. What are those two things?
Death and taxes.
Death and taxes. We all know that, right? So we've been lied to.
And people in Arkansas not liking you. That's the third.
Yes, absolutely. So there are two things. Those two things are not accurate. Only death is inevitable. Taxes are not. Because current estate tax law is actually incredibly favorable. If you're single and your estate is below $12.9 million, there's no estate tax. If you're married, double that amount. That's almost $26 million. There's no estate tax, plus your heirs get the step-up in basis. The step-up in basis is the super cool part, right? Let's say I bought a property 60 years ago for $100,000 and in Missoula, and now it's worth $1 million. Well, when I pass away, let's say I pass away yesterday, which makes this radio conversation awkward.
Very quiet on one side.
I pass away yesterday. My kids go on title to the property today. Yeah. My kid's basis becomes the $1 million. They can immediately sell it and pay no tax. They don't need to do an exchange. So all of my past taxes are forgiven through the estate process. So yeah, taxes are not inevitable. So keep exchanging throughout the course of your entire life. So that way you keep that money working for you. And then when your heirs inherit it, all of those taxes are forgiven. We call it swap until you drop. Very cool.
That's good. I love that.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Missoula Real Estate Today, presented by Diane Beck and Becky Peterson, the Beck and Beck team at Windermere Real Estate here on News Talk KGVO. And my guest, Russell Marsan, Senior Vice President and Certified Exchange Specialist with IPX1031. This is more of an observation, I guess, than a question. But listening to you here, and I hear the passion in the product that you have. You are just so dialed in. I would think, and I mean this in a very complimentary sense, your clients must really love working with you because you just leave no stone unturned.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's a blessing that I get to do what I do, right? Because my job is to help people not pay taxes. I mean, who doesn't want that? But a lot of times, selling real estate is stressful.
Sure.
Right? It's a big financial transaction. And so, and when you think about Internal Revenue Code, it gets very frustrating and very confusing. And it can be stressful. So yeah, I love it because a lot of my clients call me their life coach. And in a lot of cases, their marital coach too, because it can be stressful.
A couple things I should back up a little bit now, but I just wanted to get that in there. Can you sell raw land with an exchange and then buy a rental property?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm really glad you asked that. Yeah, there's this misconception about like kind in 1031 because you can sell real estate and buy real estate, but those two properties involved in that exchange have to be like kind with one another. And most people are visual, so there's an assumption if I sell land, I have to buy land. If I sell residential, I have to buy residential,
Sure,
commercial.
yeah.
It's not the case. All real estate is like kind with all real estate. It's not what it looks like. It's how it's treated. Any business use property is like kind. So you can sell raw land. Those of you out there in Radio Land, if you own a raw piece of land that you're doing nothing with, it's provided with no income, no depreciation. You can take that equity, maybe it's worth $300,000, and you can buy income properties. You can do an exchange tax-free into income properties. So now you have cash flow, you have depreciation, and in a lot of cases, a better appreciating asset.
I ask every guest about success stories. I guess that was kind of an example of one right there, Russ. But any transactions you've overseen in recent memory that you found to be exceptionally rewarding for whatever reasons?
Well, yeah, actually, all of my clients, right? It's all rewarding every transaction, but I actually would like to share like a Montana story with you. That's kind of a funny one. I had we used to be able to do exchanges on personal property, but the Jobs Act in 2017 changed that. So we used to be able to do exchanges on planes, boats, arts and collectibles. All of those things used to be exchangeable. They're not anymore. But prior to 2017, one of my Montana clients called me, and they wanted to sell a saber-toothed tiger skull and do a 1031 exchange. And they wanted to buy a mammoth skull with it. And they were like, is it like kind? And I told them, I said, I believe it's like kind, but the IRS didn't have the foresight to see that specific, right? So I said, what we really need to do is I need to bring your CPA into this conversation and explain to them why I think it's the CPA. But your CPA has to actually render this decision for you. So she agreed to that. And we brought the CPA on the line. And it was a conference call, me, CPA, the client. And I was going through my process of explaining why they are like kind, I believe, and the CPA shuts me down in about 5 minutes. And she says, Russell, we need to stop this conversation right now. I don't like where you're going with this, and I think you're putting my client in danger. And I said, what? And she said, I think you're saying something that's absolutely illegal for my client. And I said, why? And she said, because I'm 100% certain that saber-toothed tigers are on the endangered species list. I was like, no.
Oh, no.
I think they checked that box like 10,000 years ago. I'm pretty sure they're no longer endangered. So I was very gentle, and I explained why it is okay. But I didn't tell the client this, but I was thinking you probably need a new CPA.
Oh, man. Missoula, this has been a great show. Missoula Real Estate Today has been presented by Diane Beck and Becky Peterson, the Beck and Beck team at Windermere Real Estate on News Talk KGVO. And my guest this week has been Russell Marsan, Senior Vice President, Certified Exchange Specialist with IPX1031. You need to talk to this guy. What's the best way to get a hold of you? How do we track down Russell Marsan?
Cell phone number. No matter where I'm at, you can reach me at this number, 530-755-8355. If you call me at 9 o'clock at night, you don't have to apologize. I'm a financial tax nerd. I have no life. You'll be giving me a life by simply calling me and asking me questions anytime.
It has been great having you on the show. I hope you can come back sometime.
I look forward to it, Denny.
Thank you for listening to Missoula Real Estate Today, presented by Diane Beck and Becky Peterson, the Beck and Beck team at Windermere Real Estate.